Made a fair bit of headway on the high tunnel in our neighbor's yard today, including a new ramp to come and go, a better drainage system in the front, a whole bunch more beautiful rich soil on the garden beds, and a couple other things, a retaining wall. And so I thought I would share some notes on how that all unfolded today and what the next steps might be in here, so stick around. First thing I'll do is a quick update on the status as it is. The greens are a-greening, and the chickweed in particular. We had a salad of chickweed last night and Sasha and I were feeling dreamy over it. It's amazing to have this as a resource. We didn't even plant any of these, we just work around them. And chickweed is such an early plant, it's already starting to flower, and here we are in just mid-February. So we're harvesting more and more of that, eating that fresh in salads, and that's really quite lovely. We're a few days out, maybe a week or two or three, from some of the mustards and kales and lettuces that overwintered in here being ready to harvest. They're starting to get some new growth as it warms up. Some of the fun mustards in here and lettuces. So things are perking up and they're on their way. A fair bit of the rosemary overwintered, so we should be able to have some really nice growth on those coming into this season, maybe expand them a bit. And getting the low tunnel in the high tunnel, which is this structure here, which can get poly over it, that's getting closer to being organized and ready to go. And we got a IBC tank on the far side, perched on the same platform as we had last winter and spring. And this has been filled with pond water, and so it can slowly ease up to the temperature in here and start becoming a warmer water, so when we go to water later, it's not shockingly cold pond water. So the first thing I did when I got out here this morning was try to finalize this drainage ditch system. You can see this black perforated pipe. This may look familiar if you watch the channel quite a bit. Last year, this pipe, that pipe was buried. The low tunnel here had a solar powered fan forcing air down into that same pipe that went down, along, and over to the tank. I took it out of there because it had gotten filled with soil. We're going to redo that air system with wood and bricks so that we can clean it up a little bit easier, and put this poly pipe that we've got from a friend's spot for free into effect for what it normally is meant for. This is a high traffic area. It's a zone 1 flow pattern through here. We cross that all the time and it gets so mucky. So I dug down quite a bit, shaved, and got a bunch of soil out so we can lay the pipe in. This will get buried. I think what we'll do is simply bury it in wood chips so that for a year or so we can monitor how it functions, and if it really doesn't work, we can just pull it up, dig the mucky wood chips out and put them somewhere and reassess. And then when it really feels right, we can cover it with soil and bury it as a permanent element. And the soil that came out was an opportunity to frame some permanent raised beds nearby. So the flow and access area in front of the high tunnel is getting more defined. It looks rough right now and kind of infrastructure-y, but that's just the first charcoal sketch, so to speak. We'll wait for tomorrow's rain to inform whether or not I did this correctly. The second improvement is a new walkway to get into the space. Once the drainage ditch was done, we could take the next step there. For the last 2 years, it was just basically a pallet that had blown apart, and we'd infilled all the blown apart parts with hay and wood chips, and that was fine enough, but it retained a ton of water here, and this is a major flow. In fact, you can see this is one of the main overflow channels for our pond here. So when we get a ½ inch of rain tomorrow, this will definitely run. And up until this morning, it was running and then just getting packed with mud over here up against that broken bridge. And so these are some offcuts of locust I grabbed from my neighbor's, or our communal slabwood locust pile, and used an electric chainsaw to size up 5 simple boards roughly. Very, very rough cuts on the ends, which we can finalize with mud. And then I screwed down some boards to unify them and flipped it over. And so now we've got this nice smooth ramp. I might screw in some very thin slats across this so we have a little bit more texture, but this will be something we bring a wheelbarrow up, so I don't want to make it too bumpy. But that's been a nice upgrade. It's a really gentle pitch and should make it a little bit easier to come and go through here. We'll see once we get the first snow on there, but so far so good. The next thing was to create a retaining wall for this side of the garden space. when we envision this central walkway, I'd like to have it be a little bit more distinct. You know, there's a little variability as it goes, which is kind of par for the course with every project we do. But it's somewhat uniform, roughly 18 inches to 2 feet wide. And so this retaining wall does a few things. It tidies up and cleans the space, makes it a little bit easier to drag a hose through the central walkway without disturbing garden beds. And it allows the soil line to come right out to that vertical. And so we can plant right up to this line and have crops hanging out over the side rather than a steep wall of soil that falls into the walkway. So we just took some locust slab, as per always, sharpened some staves and wailed them in with a sledge. Maybe at some point I'll trim the excess off, but for now I'll just leave that as a deflector for the hose, and then periodically put a screw through the stave and into the upright, or I'm sorry, from the board into these staves, so that kind of holds it all together. We can backfill with soil all through here. I just rough sketch dumped material in. Another day when we're watering, we can settle that in and get it smoothed out. And there's some areas where we're going to need to prop a brick in just to get it smoother, but I'm not trying to get a perfect line. Quite clearly, that just doesn't happen anywhere in here. And so if there's lots of non-perfect straight lines, then it seems almost meaningful. It's been mild and warm. Yesterday was almost 60 degrees and very sunny, so we're using a solar panel and a pump outside. In fact, you can see I've got this length of rubber hose with a wand, very expensive stuff here. $2 from the reuse store. Ithaca Reuse, you're wonderful. Got so many things with little reuse stickers on them. Reuse wand with a reuse head and a nice quality rubber hose routed through a hole in the corner there out to a bilge pump submerged in the pond, which is attached to a really simple solar panel. I want to make a video again about this process, but it's really straightforward. It's just a 150 watt panel, a $25 or $30 bilge pump tied into the hose. And when we plug that in and it's a little bit sunny, it lifts water quite nicely and lets us water. So we soaked in probably 500 or 1,000 gallons of water into this soil over the last few days. We did an hour here, an hour there, take a break, come back, soak it again, soak it again. So we're getting it all rehydrated because pretty soon we'll be smoothing this out, getting the poly over it, and sowing all of this to some spring crops and maybe some basil, tomato, pepper to get them started. I think we can secure this as being a frost-free zone in a little bit. The next phase of this project is to visualize what this can be in the walkway. It can just be this bare soil, but I like the idea of figuring out some sort of either brick and or locust-based platform that has about 4 inches of airspace underneath the entirety of it, so that when we have the low tunnel poly on here again, we can do the fan on the far end, forcing the hot air down through underneath this whole area. If that doesn't make any sense, you can review some of the older videos, or I'll explain it in more detail as a concept when we get there. It was really promising last year how much heat was siphoned off in this, you know, in a low tunnel and a high tunnel on a sunny day. It can easily get 120 degrees in here. So that pump of air pulling all the hot and putting it down into the cold floor as a ground air heat transfer system, very rudimentary, was quite promising, and I'd like to upgrade it. Share some comments and ideas about how you could imagine that happening. But the tube failed because it got packed, but I think if it was a much larger space down there, it could work well. And then we can still backfill on top of that with compost, but instead of doing a hot compost windrow through the entire walkway, I might simplify it and just frame out a simple container and make a really piping hot compost pile in this corner that can just send heat out into the space. And then once that's piping hot and working, we flatten it out and put tons of flats of starts on it. So it's a hotbed to help plants start. And again, I'll document that when we get to it. But that is the update with the high tunnel in our neighbor's spot. Chickweed starting to get onto the menu soon enough. Little mini salads and then some real kale, and from there we'll hopefully be getting some microgreens in the next few weeks. Let us know what sort of thoughts you have, questions if you've got them, and we'll talk soon. Have a great day.